I've got a story that'll stick with me for the rest of my days. My wife, she was a good woman, never really moody or anything like that. But, of course, I always tried to spoil her a little. Good work meant there was room to indulge in little luxuries. We didn't have kids, no pets, nothing that could drain the wallet, really. Work kept me busy with occasional short business trips, but it didn't mess with our lives much. If anything, it gave us a little breather from each other, which meant we didn't get sick of the routine or start snapping at each other. All in all, things were pretty peaceful between us. I always liked it when my wife looked her best, so I made sure to help her out with that. New clothes, fresh hairdos, manicures, the whole deal. She loved it, and it wasn't much trouble for me. It made her happy, and that made me happy too. But honestly, I didn't notice right away, or maybe I just didn't want to, that small changes were starting to creep into our home. It all began when I came back from a trip, and as soon as I stepped inside, something felt off. The light in the hallway was brighter, somehow crisper. I'd gotten so used to the dim, old lighting that it was impossible not to notice. I asked my wife about it, and she just laughed, pointing to the fancy new energy-efficient bulbs she'd installed. I'm not exactly known for pinching pennies, but I gave her credit for being so thoughtful. But that was just the beginning. The next time I came home, I saw that the crooked curtain rod that had become a quirky part of our place was now perfectly straight, so much so that she'd actually taken it down, re-screwed it, and got it aligned just right. And of course it looked better. That's when I started to get a little uneasy. I walked around the apartment, half expecting to find more little surprises, and sure enough I did. The faucet in the bathroom, which had always had a slight drip, was now perfectly tight. In the kitchen, I noticed our old yellowing outlet had been swapped out for a shiny new white one. I didn't know what to say. Of course, she laughed it off, like it was no big deal. But looking back, I realize it was the little things like that piling up that started to get to me. Nothing major, sure, but those small things gradually started to throw off the sense of comfort I'd always taken for granted. I'd mentioned the faucet to her a couple of times, but she'd just brushed it off. So, I found someone who could fix it all. At first, I didn't quite know how to take it. "You called someone?" I asked. My wife just sat there, smiling to herself. "Oh, yes, a handyman," she replied. "A jack of all trades. He's a master for an hour, for a week, forever." And since she brought it up, she casually mentioned that she'd decided to go with him. I'm sorry, I know we don't argue, and that's been a big plus. But now that we're parting ways, I hope it's peaceful and quiet too. At that point, I was left speechless. She stood up to pack her things, and I just watched her silently. By the way, a bit of context. I grew up without a father, so when it came to repairs, plumbing, or electrical work, I had no clue. But I was smart with my career and spent my time climbing the ladder, earning enough to pay people to handle all the things around the house I couldn't do. I always thought of it as an advantage, especially in the eyes of women, my wife included, and as a relief for me personally. So, when this whole situation caught me off guard, I didn't let it shake me enough to stop her. What's the point? What could I change? I calmly helped her pack, even gave her money for the trip. I figured I was smart enough not to dig into the details. Things could have been made up anyway. And to be honest, I didn't really want to know. I had work to do, and I threw myself into it. After she left, I wasn't too surprised when, 4 months later, she showed up at my door. It was as if I'd known this would happen. I listened, intrigued, as she told me about her handyman who, it turned out, was exactly what she thought he was, someone who did everything himself. Around the house, at work, in life, everything was a DIY project. The guy had no money to speak of, and whatever he did have was carefully rationed. Food was bought on a budget. Her once stylish clothes were now repaired by his hands. It got to the point where, when she wanted sushi, this jack-of-all-trades tried to make a cheaper version at home. Of course, it turned out terribly. Naturally, such a miserable life didn't sit well with her, and she grew frustrated. She complained about how small-minded men could be, and how great I was in comparison. I just sat there, listening to her talk about me, how I was the real man she hadn't appreciated enough. "You were so much better," she said. I smiled to myself, thinking, yeah, well, forget about the little things around the house. We can always call the professional. I couldn't help but feel a little pleased, not in a petty way, but in the sense that sometimes you need to experience something to truly appreciate what you had. "Go back to your handyman," I said, "and maybe you'll learn to appreciate the value of real work." I wasn't gloating, but there was something satisfying about knowing she'd learned her lesson, even if the hard way. Of course, I said my goodbyes. The divorce papers were already at court, and I wasn't about to take them back.